All right, let's talk about the fall campaign, because we're told that starting after Labor Day, although he's already started, the president is expected to go out a couple of times a week and hold rallies of some sort in key states around the country. This last week, on Thursday, as part of the Republican convention, the president gave his acceptance speech on the South Lawn of the White House. We're showing pictures of it now. More than 1,500 people packed in, very few masks, no social distancing. Lara, is the president just going to ignore the public health guidelines?
Well, look, we always, whether it's at this event you saw at the White House or at any campaign event, we always encourage people to follow the guidelines and to do what they think is best for themselves. So we always have masks available. We encourage people to use them. We always have hand sanitizer available. And we encourage people to spread themselves out. But I think, you know, as it always works out, people always rush towards the front of the stage. They want to be around this president. They pack themselves in. And look, at a certain point in this country, I think we all have to recognize that people want to get back to normal. And you know what? Maybe it's going to a Trump rally that does that. But we are always following the guidelines. We had health professionals work with our convention team the entire time. We followed exactly what they said we should do, and we'll continue to do that.
But some health officials say, you know, I mean, the fact is you did stack the chairs right next to each other. Some health officials say this has the potential to be a super spreader event.
Yeah, well, it was an outdoor venue, and I'll remind everybody that the folks that were spitting in the faces of our people leaving the convention that night were not social distancing. It was an absolutely disgusting display. The next day, there were, you know, thousands of people on the National Mall all packed together as well. So, look, we either have to say that everybody plays by the same rules, or we have to stop talking about it. Because whenever you're talking about the president's campaign, you know, and how people weren't specifically socially distanced, but the next day, thousands of people on the National Mall, and that's not a problem for anybody. It seems a little hypocritical.
This is Trump's advisor and daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, getting called out for her father-in-law having held yet another mass gathering in the middle of the pandemic. And per usual, instead of taking responsibility, the Trump campaign instead wheeled off a list of excuses and lies. Lara actually says, quote, "We're always following the guidelines." Trump's Republican National Convention speech had over 1,000 people packed into an audience with barely anyone wearing a mask. In Washington, D.C., mass gatherings over 50 are prohibited, face masks are mandatory, and social distancing is recommended. None of those were followed. I know this might come as news to the Trump campaign, but just saying you did something doesn't make it true. She goes on to say that at a certain point, we all have to recognize that people want to go back to normal. And she's right. But the way to do that is not to ignore coronavirus guidelines that help contain the spread of this virus. Part of going back to normal, a big part, is not having a deadly virus sweeping across the country. It's not losing 1,000 Americans a day. It's not putting our friends and loved ones at risk. Knowing that any one of us may become a vector for the virus that could then go on to kill someone is not normal. So I get that the virus might be politically inconvenient for the Trump campaign, but pretending it doesn't exist anymore does not make it go away. It's still here, and it is patient, and while the GOP might have signaled that they're done caring, the virus hasn't. Their casual rhetoric surrounding the pandemic doesn't make it any less lethal. All it does is serve as proof that your life is not as important as their campaign. Bear in mind too, the last time the Trump campaign opted to hold a massive rally in the middle of this pandemic, Trump's own friend and advisor Herman Cain contracted coronavirus and shortly thereafter died. So Trump may cry his crocodile tears and pretend that he was torn up over it, but the fact that he's right back to holding these same exact type of events goes to show that it clearly didn't have much of an impact on him. Consider too that the people showing up to clap for Trump are those closest to him. They're his friends and family members and advisors and staffers and their families, meaning that the people he's putting at risk of contracting this virus are his people. I don't know about you, but I have zero intention of going anywhere near my family and friends if it means I'd put any one of them at risk. And that's because that's what you do when you care about them. And yet the fact that Trump is doing it anyway, and doing it to those he supposedly cares most about, goes to show that there is nothing and no one that he won't sacrifice to help himself politically. And by the way, We wouldn't even be having this conversation if it wasn't for Donald Trump, and that's important to remember, because while the virus itself wasn't Trump's fault, the failed response to it was. Every other country in the world faced the same obstacles that we did, and yet just about every one of those countries fared better than us because they did the work. They got to work on testing and contact tracing, they produced PPE, they advocated for stay-at-home orders, and they encouraged the use of masks. Trump didn't. Trump spent months pretending it was a Democratic hoax. He fomented protests against stay-at-home orders. He politicized the use of masks. He held his own rallies. He wanted all of the credit and none of the effort. And now look at us, 180,000 deaths, 6 million cases, and Trump's position is that he'd rate his response a 10 out of 10. I'd say the delusion was funny if it wasn't so dangerous. The fact is that if you think Trump's response to the virus is bad now, just imagine if he gets reelected. Just imagine when he's no longer accountable to the American people. This is him on his best behavior, and still he's holding super spreader events and pretending it's completely over. There is only one way to ensure that this virus is dealt with, and that is voting Trump out of office so that the actual adults can get to work. While you're here, please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I take a deeper dive into the week's biggest stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Kamala Harris, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Nancy Pelosi, Cory Booker, Eric Swalwell, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.